you'll see me, Jeff, and Heidi here. I think we have a few others of our group that are going to be joining this afternoon, but we have a team of 6 leaders because we can't always be here on time. So we're glad to have each other to help. But this is all volunteer. So if you would like to buy us a cup of coffee, if you like our content, we are certainly open to taking a donation from you to help pay for expenses like, you know, keeping our Zoom and our website up and all of that. So without further ado, Michael, would you like to get started?
I sure would. Thank you so much for the introduction. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Somebody's going to have to unmute and tell me if you can see my screen.
Yes.
Great. Okay, awesome. So right off the bat, I'll introduce myself in just a little bit. I wanted to get right into the topic. First of all, and talk about, you know, something that I've been encountering more and more, which is, you know, I've incendiarily labeled it the chaos problem because it gets people's attention. But I mean, really, you know, like chaos is all around us, and whether you're calling it, you know, surprises or unpredictability or volatility, whatever you call it, we see it all around us. You know, to me, the most recent example of this that I've been kind of thinking about is the, you know, Boeing 737 MAX 8 debate going on with airplanes. I mean, I'm getting emails almost weekly from Southwest with an update on this, you know, hundreds of millions of dollars of fleet that is quite literally grounded. And, you know, not getting too deep in the details of this, that is, to me, a huge indicator of the fact that you can't predict the market sentiment, right? It may be that those planes are still entirely safe, but the market sentiment is that, hey, we're not risk tolerant. We don't want to get on a plane that potentially has risk, and that's costing all these airlines very, very much money right now. So chaos is everywhere. You know, we just talked about a market sentiment example. I see this with competition. You know, going back to my Leankit days, I'll talk a little bit about my backend in a second, but when I was at Leankit, we were in the business of selling lean and agile project management software. And a small player at the time, Trello, was in our space. We'd always looked at Trello as kind of like the wedding planner's Kanban. It was great for individuals. It was great for people. Wasn't really enterprise. And we could have never predicted that Atlassian, Jira, would buy them and they would become a significant threat, right? So your competition is out there. They're just as smart as you. They're thinking about the same things, and they will do unpredictable things. And it's, I think sometimes we do ourselves a disservice by assuming that, you know, we're better and smarter. They've got the same great, smart people on their side trying to make your life difficult. And then also, you know, customers. We have customers who will leave us. We're a SaaS, we're a subscription business, so we care a lot about renewals, and customers will leave us. And there are sometimes when that is within our control, and we feel bad about that because we didn't do something right? We could have renewed that customer, we didn't. But more times than not, it's totally out of our control. They were acquired. They closed their business. They did something that was totally beyond our control. So this stuff is everywhere. And don't kid yourselves in thinking that it's external only. There is so much internal chaos that I think we sometimes mislabel with other terms that make it feel like we can't control it, we can't account for it. But at the end of the day, I think we can. So, conflict, interpersonal conflict. There are times where we stop behaving like the logical decision-making machines that sometimes we believe we are, and we devolve into making these emotional human decisions. And that's the fact. Like, we are humans, and we do have emotion, and emotion plays a big part in some of the decisions. Even though if you sit down with a pen and a paper and a spreadsheet, you're like, well, that doesn't make any sense. Why would you decide that? Well, we're human. Another part of that is retention. I'm in Nashville. A lot of Ambition's employees are in Nashville, and Amazon recently announced that they're bringing a large office. They're going to be a big employer in the Nashville space. So I have to think a lot about, hey, like what's going to happen? These people who are making emotional decisions, not rational decisions, are potentially going to be swayed by working for one of the largest organizations out there. That's another element of unpredictability that I can't control. And then maybe most common to the software development space is just defects, right? Defects happen where nobody's building perfect software. Defects happen. And what I'm hopefully here to talk about today, and what I'm hopefully here to convince you of, is that these things are totally unpredictable and they're unavoidable. So don't try to avoid them. But there are some things that we can do to take advantage of this unpredictability. So I'm trying to change the narrative a little bit. I want us to get out of using chaos as a word and talk about volatility or variability. I think those are some terms that they mean very similar things, but as you look at what other industries, what other companies have done, I think there's a lot of knowledge that we can draw on when you're talking about volatility and variability. And then also it's to stop thinking about this as a problem and start thinking of it as an opportunity, because I really think there is an opportunity here. I have been noticing this chat blow up with messages, and I'm not quite sure how to see it while I'm presenting. So I could just ask one of the co-hosts to, if one of y'all would just let me know if folks have questions. I would love for this to be a conversation rather than just a presentation. So if anybody wants to jump in with questions or comments, I'm glad for that to happen.
Sure thing. So what's going on in the chat right now is we're all getting to know each other, where each other's from. So we're all paying attention to you. Don't worry.
No worries. I'm more than happy for y'all to chat away. I just want to make sure that I'm not skipping over some points. But in the spirit of that, I will go ahead and, here, we'll skip ahead. Let me introduce myself. My name is Michael. I am currently serving as the Vice President of Customer Operations at Ambition. Ambition is a business-to-business SaaS product, and we sell software to help organizations do a better job of performance management. That manifests itself mostly in sales organizations, but it's really applicable anywhere where there's a highly instrument, highly metric-driven environment. I have gone so far as to suggest that we could use Ambition with development teams, measuring the amount of, whatever you want to measure, defects, codes, deployments, et cetera. I have a little bit of an interesting background. I am not a traditional business leader. I don't have an MBA. I didn't go to business school. My background is actually technical. I started during college doing small and medium business IT consulting. That led to my introduction to software as a service when I joined LeanKit. I originally joined LeanKit to run their internal IT services, which this was a while ago. This was before DevOps was a thing. And then as we kind of evolved into the land of DevOps and infrastructure operations, I was part of that team. There was a point where LeanKit started exploring new markets. We were a company that was built to do enterprise Kanban for enterprise software development shops. And as we explored that space, we learned that there was a huge parallel with construction. And there was also a lean construction movement. A lot of these same lean and agile principles that were being developed and applied, or had been developed and applied to software development for a long time, are starting to get some traction in the construction space. And that's kind of where I made my big transition from mostly technical with a little bit of business to mostly business with a need to be technical as well. So worked on the new market development team exploring construction for a while at LeanKit. And then from there, I moved on to build out and lead our technical implementation team, eventually our overall customer success team. And now at Ambition, I lead our customer success organization. I like to think of it as customer operations, because really across success and support and solution engineering and training, it's really kind of a multifaceted operational group. So So here's what I've been doing for the last 10 or 15 years. And I think it's important to call out that I have very, very strong and specific biases. I've been living in this bubble of kind of lean and agile for at least the last 7 years. So I definitely have a propensity to be a little idealistic. I think I don't think being an idealist is a problem. I think you can cover a lot of ground if you're idealistic. But again, I've been living this for a while. So what I say might not fly in your organizations. Another big bias that I have is that both at LeanKit and at Vision, we're not just selling a solution or a product. We're not really a commodity. We're part of a evolution to the status quo. So at LeanKit, we are helping enterprise portfolio project management groups evolve from waterfall to whether it was either Scrum or SAFe or some combination of lean principles. Now at Ambition, I'm part of a similar journey where we're helping go from old school performance management, which is, hey, sales leaders, here's a number, hit it at all costs, to kind of a new model that's much more focused on providing plans, providing support, measuring progress against attainable goals. So I definitely, again, kind of reinforcing the fact that I can be idealistic, I definitely approach things with a mentality of, hey, the status quo isn't good enough. I'm not happy to operate within the rules that have been set. We need to make some changes to allow for change. Personally, I'm very much operational. I love optimizing things. I have no misgivings about sometimes you have to build things that don't scale. I totally understand that. I'm a big believer in kind of the Spotify skateboard, bike, car model. I really, really like that. But I think the key component of that is that you're building repurposable technology. So when I build something, even if it's a small component or a small process or a small team, I'm building that with an eye to the future of what can we learn from this exercise that is repurposable, because I don't want to just throw the whole exercise away. And then lastly, I think it's really important that organizations, metrics, teams, objectives are all structured in ways that reinforce support for humans rather than requiring it at the expense of interpersonal communication. Really what I'm saying is you need to build a system that encourages people to do the things that the business wants, not build a system where you're negotiating and trying to work with individuals, or individuals themselves are trying to do the right thing for the business at opposition with their metrics. Nothing frustrates me more than when somebody comes to me and says, hey, listen, I think this is the right thing for the business, but this is going to hurt me or hurt the team on our attainment of this metric. Because to me, that means that the plan and the system isn't aligned. So there you go. There's all the reasons that you shouldn't listen to me, or the reasons that my advice might not be applicable to your environment. But let's rewind really quick and talk more about this chaos, volatility, problem, opportunity space. So I've been thinking about this for a while. And there are two, I'm looking for more. So far, there have been two examples that have really jumped out to me of other places, one a while ago and one more recently, where organizations have they've noticed, they've observed volatility in a problem space that matters to them, and then they've turned that into an opportunity. So the first of these is Wall Street, right? I don't know if anybody's read Flash Plays by Michael Lewis, but it's a really interesting story. And it's about how the large Wall Street institutions leveraged technology to get an edge, to make a bunch of money. And the net, what happened here is these Wall Street institutions had an opportunity to see all of the trades, like all the buys and sells that were happening with securities, assets, et cetera. And so they could see the volume of here's what people are buying, here's what people are selling. And what they did is they used technology. So at the time, this was a while, I don't remember the date, but this was a while ago. And they used fiber optic cable, which were, they also amassed very significant computing power, especially for that time. And what they were doing is they were engaging in this process that we now call arbitrage, where they were watching the buy orders come in, they're watching the sell orders go out, and they were submitting in high volume their own orders that were fractionally more or less expensive than the going rate. So essentially, think about, if you're at the grocery store and you're buying lemons, and you know that a whole bunch of people are like, hey, I'll buy a lemon for $1, and you're like, hey, I'll sell that lemon to you for 99 cents. And then on the other side, you're making an extra cent. When you're transacting billions of lemons every day, you can make a lot of money. And that's essentially what they did with leveraging technology to get close to the volatility, right? Because there's volatility. People are not all buying and selling at the same price. So they observed the volatility, they got close to it, they leveraged technology, and they made a bunch of money. This book is, you should read it just for your own entertainment. This is pretty much why computers can't stock trade anymore, because with this technology and then the fact that researchers at Stanford and MIT are spending a bunch of time on this, computers beat us at this all the time. So this to me explains to me why I've done terribly with Robinhood, and I just don't try anymore. So at this point, I'm out of the game. The other example here, much more recently, is with Tesla and Cobalt. So Tesla, obviously, huge EV manufacturer. Something that's very, very important to Tesla is being able to make batteries. They don't have a product without batteries, and Cobalt is a key component in lithium-ion batteries. And lithium-ion batteries are the same. It's what's in your phone. It's what's in my laptop right here. And Cobalt is very important to manufacturing those. Now, Cobalt itself is problematic for a couple reasons. One, Cobalt is found in areas that typically have poor labor conditions. They're found in the parts of the world where mining it is problematic. It's just not great for the humans that live there. Even more so, to compound that, there's not a direct cobalt market. You're not mining cobalt just like you're mining iron out of the earth. Cobalt is a secondary product of nickel and copper. So as the nickel and copper markets shift, which you can probably imagine, I mean, those are much huger markets, as there are influences that move those markets, that's drastically impacting the cobalt market. So even if Tesla says, hey, I'm the biggest consumer of cobalt out there, I'm going to exert some leverage on this market because we have a high need for it, they're still totally at the whim of these other copper and nickel markets. So that's not great, right? It's really hard for Tesla to go to a consumer and say, hey, listen, we know that we told you we were going to sell you this Model 3 for $40,000 last month when you met, but that can cost you $60,000 now because the cobalt market has shifted and we can't produce the car for that anymore, right? So this is problematic. To combat that, Tesla is doing two things. One, they're vertically integrating the production of their batteries with a gigafactory to kind of bring down the overall unit economics of the batteries. But more importantly to this example, they're investing heavily in reducing or totally minimizing the need for copper in their batteries. So they, again, took a look at some chaos, some variability that's out of their control. They said, hey, listen, this thing is totally out of our control. Even if we're the biggest purchaser of cobalt, that still doesn't give us enough control over this market. So what are we going to do? We're gonna spend a lot of money probably and kind of reduce or eliminate our dependence on it. So as I see them, the common threads here are, one, what we said earlier, volatility is inevitable. You're not going to get away from it. Two, get as close to the source of the volatility as you can, right? Remember the fiber optic cable for Wall Street that's how they got close. They reduced the number of, not even milliseconds, nanoseconds that it took to understand what was happening. So they got as close to the source as they could, then create some levers that you own or control, right? Find a way to impact or make moves in that space, And then 4 is just react as soon as possible. And really what I mean by this is, take advantage of that information and then take advantage of your levers to make moves that allow you to gain an advantage. The way that here's what I would love to do if I had a model for this driving home in Nashville traffic every day. I wish I had a drone hovering at a couple hundred feet above this traffic that was watching which of these lanes was going to move and which wasn't going to move, and just told me, hey, get over 2 lanes. You're about to get a 1 car length ahead. And that's exactly what I'm talking about, right? Like there is some variability, there's some chaos, traffic is chaotic. Get a perspective, get close to it, understand the problem, create levers. I already have my levers. Fortunately, I do use my turn signals. So that's literally my lever, right? I'm moving in and out of lanes. And then with this system and making fast decisions, and that's very important, making fast decisions, I can respond and get home in, probably 30 seconds less. Like in the grand scheme of things, it doesn't matter. But I think that's a helpful model that everybody here has probably encountered to some degree. Okay. Let me just pause there. Does anybody have questions, comments? I don't know if y'all have been following the chat, but I'm happy to move forward. I just want to take a drink of this coffee.
Yeah, so we have one question in the chat, Michael, from Isaac, one of our co-hosts. Are these all ways to become more anti-fragile?
Sorry, you broke up just as you were repeating that question, Isaac's question.
Sure. Are these all ways to become more anti-fragile? I
think so. If you think of anti-fragile as, if you consider fragility as the impact of chaos, right? We're not like glass organizations, right? If you throw something at us, we're not going to shatter into a million pieces. But there's an element of truth there, right? If we're unable to adapt to some unpredictability, then yeah, if that sends us careening down a dark path, we definitely don't want that. So if that's how you're going to think about it, if you want to think about it as like anti-fragility, then I think this absolutely is that. Because at the end of the day, what this is doing is, maybe it's taking it a step further, right? Maybe what we is, how do I have these things hurt me less? And what I have been thinking about is, I don't want these things, like, they're going to hurt us to some degree. They're diminishing returns by mitigating the damage that they can do. So rather than getting I think a lot about like the grade school system, right? Rather than getting an F in adaptability, let's get a C or a B in adaptability, but they're diminishing returns there. So I don't want to get an A in adaptability, because the effort that it took me to get all the way up to an A, I could better invest somewhere else. And what I'm here to talk about is, here's a way that you can invest it in a net positive method that gives you a return rather than just mitigating your loss. When I was in college, I annoyed my parents endlessly by telling them that my target was always to get a 90 or a 91 on every exam. And they're like, why wouldn't you ever shoot for 100? It's like, well, it's a 4-point system. If I get a 90 or a 99, that's these same points to GPA. I want 90s across the board, not 3 99s and 3 89s. And that's kind of how I think about it, right? If you spend all your time totally mitigating the damage that external factors can do to you, you might be very, very good at that, but you could have invested some of that elsewhere. And maybe you can invest some of that in one of these opportunistic models that allows you to take advantage of the situation. Hopefully that answered your question, Isaac. So let's talk about status quo, or my perception of where we are today with regards to the status quo. Coming back a second, right? To do these things, one thing that's very important is our decision-making process, because when one of these external, chaotic, unpredictable events happens, decisions have to be made. And the way that those decisions are made is very important. So I think we've all gotten very good with our decision I ascribe to kind of the PDCA of, hey, let's find out, something happened, let's plan for it. Let's come up with a hypothesis of how we're going to address that. Let's make sure that it works first, right? And then with that kind of like a micro learning cycle accomplished, then let's roll it out. I'm a big believer in that. And I think that all of us think a lot about kind of, delegating decision-making, making these things faster. But something that I've noticed more and more is that there's some interesting statements I hear a lot of. These statements are, hey, this is a really big risk. This event that happened, very risky. I need to run it by the higher ups. Pause, right? Stop your decision-making cycle. We need to pause. Another one I hear is, hey, great, you solved the problem. This is retrospective, right? The problem was solved. Things are great. However, there were some upstream, unknown upstream and downstream impacts that were negative. We've made it worse than better. Please run it by me next time. And I want to unpack that for a second because there's multiple things going on. One is unintended consequences happened that put us in a worse overall state. That is a fact, and that happens all the time. But the reaction to that I hear a lot of times is the emotional reaction of, hey, please run it by me. I, as the more senior decision maker, need to sign off on that. I want to know about it. I don't know that running it by you is going to solve those things. So it's really two different asks here, right? One is, hey, let's not create upstream and downstream impacts. But secondly, it's, hey, let's have a higher level of sign off on these things. And then the last one is just, hey, you didn't have authority to make that decision. That one seems very cut and dry. I have yet to be in a situation where I fully understand my decision-making capability. I think that we generally do a really poor job of clear defining what those guardrails are. In my experience, the only time I know when I've overstepped my decision-making authority is by making a mistake. There's no way of knowing, hey, these are the real boundaries of where this thing is. So here's some things that I've heard. And overall, my observation is that decision makers, the people who makes the ultimate decision, is not decided by the complexity of the problem. It's decided by the potential impact of that not going well. So this is a contrived example that I've created to kind of demonstrate this point. And that is that, let's say you have two customers, they're experiencing an identical problem. Your first customer, who is worth a modest sum of revenue, is experiencing a problem. What happens? Your support team gets involved. This is a known issue. There's a known workaround. They work with a customer. They say, hey, listen, we know about this thing that's going on. Here's the workaround. We'll walk you through it. Customer is, maybe not thrilled, but they're still getting work done. And then that gets, whether it's a product request or enhancement or defect, that goes to product management. A cycle continues. Okay. Exact same scenario happens with a high value customer, and then do the floodgates start flowing, right? It gets escalated on their side. Their product manager gets involved. Maybe their senior, like their buyer and senior stakeholders are getting involved. Your customer success team's involved, and your executive team gets involved. We get on calls, we get on planes, we do all sorts of things. At the end of the day, the solution, the workaround is the same. It just took weeks to make. And now at every quarterly business review with this customer, we're talking about that issue and whether it's resolved yet, and then how it did get resolved. And this one thing that was potentially a very minor change just gets, I don't want to say blown out of proportion because that's not fair, but it gets a lot more attention and a lot more activity. So my question to you is, the complexity of the issue, the actual issue itself, was identical in both cases. And I'll be the first to admit that that is really scary. And it should be, because while the complexity of the problem is the same, the impact of that problem is very different, right? One of these customers is worth way, way more. If I accept like a 5% chance that this is going to create an issue, that 5% is worth a whole lot more for my very large customer. So this is a valid concern, but I think this is the root of where we can start to make faster decisions that allow us to take advantage of the variability and start to gain that variability. So big decisions take longer. are made by more senior leader require many more inputs and meetings. And this is my observation. You know, the higher the risk, or the higher really the financial risk, the longer they take to make. And logically, if we go back to our hyper logical selves, doesn't make any sense. As risk averse human beings, this feels right. It's like, yes, we should spend more time, we should be more deliberate with the riskier decisions. Okay, so this is a adaptation of kind of a lean principle. A lot of kind of philosophy and thought from Toyota lead to the idea is that, you know, the people that are closest to the variability, the problem in this case, will come up with the most creative solutions to take advantage of it fastest. This is an adaptation of the whole, like, you know, the people closest to the problem, they're the best about solving it. I think that the people closest to the variability also not only know the best way to game it or to take advantage of it, but will also do it very, very quickly. So how do we do more of this? Well, part of this is letting the people closest to the decision make it. But again, that doesn't work, right? The first thing that I see when I say, okay, well, I'm going to let the people closest to my very large customer make a decision, here are the problems. One is people might not always have the full picture, right? There's more going on that's maybe outside of their scope of knowledge that needs to be considered. We need to make sure those decisions are in line with our top level strategy. Making sure that all stakeholders feel buy-in is important, right? I don't know the last time you made a charge forward with a decision without getting consensus, but it's not, you know, you're not going to get the same level of commitment on the next decision that you have to make. Once it's made, it needs to be properly communicated. So there are all of these things, and it really culminates in the last one, which to me is, hey, as a, you know, and this is personal for me, right? As the vice president of customer operations, I'm accountable for everything. It doesn't matter why it happened. It's on me. I'm a huge believer in Jocko Willnick's book, Extreme Ownership. So it all rolls down to me. And if I have this very high level of accountability, then I also need to have a very be involved in making all these decisions. I think that is the existing sentiment. And what I'm here to try to convince you of today is that when we talk about the role of leadership, it really is to change the narrative around these things. So rather than saying, hey, these folks don't see the full picture, I think leadership's role is to make sure that they do see the full picture. Rather than saying, hey, I need to make sure all of our decisions are in line with our top level strategy. Okay, make sure that those folks understand the top level strategy and make sure they understand what you're trying to accomplish and where you're going. Instead of making sure that you personally are informing, consulting all the stakeholders, operationalize it, right? Put processes in place, define who those folks are, and create avenues for your contributors to do that themselves. Democratize communication, make that just happen intuitively. Don't make decisions, facilitate them. In my meeting, I am striving on an ongoing basis to talk more and more. And you know, we did this meeting yesterday. We got out of the meeting and I closed with just saying, listen, guys, I'm giving myself like a C in this meeting today because I said way more than I want to say. I want to be the least heard contributor, and my goal here is alignment and facilitating. I don't want to make decisions. I want all of you to be making these decisions. And then the last one, maybe is the hardest, is you've got to keep that ownership. You have to keep that level of responsibility, and you have to have confidence in the process, because when it breaks, because invariably it will break and bad things will happen, those are the cases where what you do is very important. And I think what you do in those cases is you stay the course. You say, listen, I believe in this. This is how we're operating. I trust everybody on this team, and I'm not going to get scared and hoard decision-making capability. So I kind of distilled this into kind of 3 statements that I think about a lot. And it's, I'm going to empower team level decisions while focusing personally on alignment and communication. I'm personally taking accountability for those decisions, but when things don't go well, I'm coaching and improving rather than consolidating and controlling. And then right? I told you earlier, I'm an optimizer. I have to have some North Star for how to improve this system. And I'm optimizing for decision-making speed and overall effectiveness over my own personal influence, and kind of the overall lean principle of I don't want to create super hyper efficient work centers. I want to improve the overall system. So these are some statements that I think about a lot. And I think that when you talk about this, like, what does this mean in terms of organizational strategy? It means invest in alignment, spend time and money aligning your producers, then empower those producers to be making decisions. You want to de-risk those decisions by making sure that they are able to do all the things that you fear that they won't. And then make communication just happen, operationalize communication. I haven't figured that piece out yet. Communication is really hard. We're a distributed company that makes it even harder. Actually, we're a semi-distributed company, which I think is the hardest. We have some local groups and some remote groups. And man, I can tell you, figuring that out is a whole podcast series in and of itself. But I think if you focus on these things strategically, you can make a lot of progress. So this, while hopefully everything that I'm saying here makes a lot of sense and everybody's nodding their head and saying, yep, makes sense. Yep, makes sense. I can tell you from personal experience, it's not natural. It's really hard and it scares you. There are tons of times where I will see something happening on Slack, on a meeting with a customer, and man, I just have that sinking feeling in my stomach, and I want to jump in. I want to take control of the situation, and it's really hard, A, not to do that, and then B, to trust my peers, right, other leaders, founders, to buy into this and say, listen, I'm not on a beach somewhere. I'm monitoring this situation. Just because you don't see me emailing, Slacking, getting on a phone, that doesn't mean I'm not involved and I'm not aware of it. My value to the organization is not determined in the number of meetings that I hold or messages that I send or how visible I personally am. It's in the process and in the decision-making. And that's scary. It's hard to say, I'm going to take a back seat, not be visible, because a lot of times when things aren't going right, that's where people drive value. They're like, oh yeah, Michael is really involved. I see Michael visiting customers. I see Michael solving problems on Slack. It's hard to not do that. Okay, so I'm going to hopefully assume that everybody's with me so far in terms of, hey, this makes a lot of sense, but it's tough, and there's some definite gotchas. Let's talk about what I have learned and how I have kind of built a model that I hope takes advantage of some of these things. The first piece of this is building teams. The very first thing I want to just get out ahead of this and say, I'm not suggesting that you need a reorg. What I am suggesting is if you want to empower decision-making, if you want your frontline producers making decisions, they need a couple things, right? They need context. They need to understand your entire business process. They need to understand your entire customer lifecycle end to end. And to do that, what I found is really effective is to create cross-functional teams. These can be in name only. They don't, these teams don't need a manager. Everybody has their own manager. Everybody has their own nothing changes. You bring a group of folks together and you say, listen, everybody in this group represents one stage of the customer lifecycle. Between all of you, you fully understand our customer life. Each of you is touching the customer at one point. And if you create these teams, we call them pods. That's not a clever acronym. It doesn't stand for anything. It's just a cool name. But these groups really are able to get a full perspective on what's happening. So I put two particular pictures in here because what I want you to think about is what's very important here is this is not a homogeneous group of people who all do the same. This is not a cycling team, right? On a cycling team, everybody's a cyclist. They all have the same skills. They all have the same experience. They all have the same goal with little variability. This is much more like a football team where everybody's playing a different role. and you need a organization. But everybody does different things and works together to achieve an outcome. So number one, create these teams. If you are able to call them teams, call them whatever you want. If you're able to create these, then you've just created an environment where problems can be solved, because now you have kind of frontline perspective over the whole problem space. Here's a picture of an office building that to me helps think about making sure I slice this the right way. If you have an office building with every floor being a different department, right? Each of these floors is a group of functional experts. What I'm suggesting is that you take a vertical slice and you say, hey, I need one person from each of these places, and don't just create one team, create a bunch of teams, create 10 slices, and create 10 of these different teams that have great perspective and are able to engage in kind of like full life cycle problem solving. This should feel like, I don't know if anybody follows Formula One, current season going on right now. This feels a lot to me like a pit crew. Problem comes in, everybody jumps on it, everybody knows exactly what their role is, how to solve the problem. You jump in, you act quickly, and then the car takes off. And that didn't require any higher level decision making. Everything is contained right there. And then you talk about it later, right? You analyze how that happened and how that talks later. The second is kind of setting the expectation that innovation is expected, because that, I think, sometimes is tough. Not only is it scary for me as a leader to hand off decision-making capability and still maintain accountability, I think it's really scary for producers and for our frontline folks to make those decisions. I mean, whether that goes well or poorly is on you. And the best way that I've found to de-risk that is to really invest in the celebration of failure. The more, something that I believe a lot in is, as a SaaS organization, you're going to get it wrong more times than you get it right. And I think that at the macro, like as a whole company, if you distill that down to a role, it's figuring out how do we celebrate every time something goes wrong, because each time something goes wrong, we're closer to getting it right. And that is we talk a lot about like celebrating our losses because we can learn from them. I think it's even more so of like each loss, each failure is actually one step closer. You think about game theory, right? You've just removed one of your options. Your parameters, your probability of winning is now way better because you've eliminated one of these things. So what do you need to do? You need a bunch. You need to fail really fast, and you need to fail in a very shallow way where you can experiment quickly and then figure out the thing that's going to work and then invest in that. So figuring out ways to say, hey, I expect innovation and we're not scared of falling and tripping. We're actually going to celebrate that. So however that makes sense for your culture and your organization, I'd encourage you to do that. Oh yeah, this takes a lot of trust. One thing that I have observed is that trust and camaraderie are very different. It's easy to build camaraderie. I can go tell my team, hey, we're going to go out for drinks. Hey, we're going to go out for dinner. We're going to go do an escape game. We're going to do a fun event. And I can build a lot of camaraderie. I don't know if I've built a lot of trust. I've built maybe a little bit of interpersonal relationship, but I haven't really built trust. Trust comes from going through difficult, challenging, harrowing experiences together. So what I spend a lot of time thinking about is how do I create those difficult, challenging experiences for my team and channel that in a positive way. So one thing that I haven't done yet as I ambition, I've done at a previous organization, is we had some recurring business challenges. One that really jumps out to me that I remember vividly was, we were a lean project management company. We had certain beliefs. We also had enterprise customers that were asking for time tracking functionality, which just like vehemently was disaligned with our value proposition. Be like, no, we don't believe in time tracking. We think that that's not the right way to do things. You should use cycle. You should use all these other metrics instead of time on project. And yet our customers were like, well, yeah, well, we still need this. So you guys do it, go get software from somebody else that does. So this was a big debate. At one point, what we did is we created some of these cross-functional teams, and we said, all right, everybody has 6 weeks. We had probably 3 or so of these teams. And we said, figure it out. Like each of you break off into your separate groups, solve this challenge in a way that is aligned with who we believe we are as a company, but also solves these customer needs. And that was a really tough exercise. Some people, were very busy. They didn't really hold up their end of the project. It was like being back in high school or college doing a group project. And that's not, I got away from that. I don't want to be in that environment. I chose to not be in academia because I prefer a capitalistic model where doing the right thing and being effective gets rewarded. And this was back to the opposite of that. But I can tell you that those folks that I did that project with are probably some of the folks that I'm still closest with, no longer being at that organization, because going through that experience together and having to present that to the entire company was a challenging experience that all brought us closer, not on a like, hey, we're cool and we text each other about what we're doing over the weekend, but in a I have implicit trust with this group of humans. I know that we're all looking out for each other, and my default now to interpreting what things that they're telling me is, I know how you think, I know how you solve problems. I'm instantly thinking about the way that you are contributing to the business, and no longer in the default mode, which is, how does this impact me? What are you actually thinking? Are you trying to get a leg up on me? What's going on here? Which is kind of the default way that we interact with other humans, because we're all very risk averse. So when an idea is created, gut reaction is this risky? And then once you've de-risked it, then you can be like, okay, what's the opportunity of this thing? But you got to get past that first stage of, hey, is this thing risky? And doing these types of things helps to just short circuit that process. If you build that trust, you don't have to do it. So my suggestion here is that as you think about building these teams, not doing the traditional team building exercises, but really throw some challenging stuff at them, because 1, they'll probably surprise you, and 2, you're going to create some trust that will accelerate the entire process from that point forward. Okay, make space for collaboration. I think this is really important because we're all very, very busy, and you can assemble this team and you can build some trust, and everybody can be very pleased with one another. But if they're not taking time, and if you're not requiring them to take time, everybody's going to still be focused on their day-to-day tasks. I was at SaaS annual earlier this year, and Mark Roberge was talking about his days with HubSpot and how they evolved as a company. And he was talking about his leadership team when he said this. So I'm adapting it a little bit to the context of kind of customer teams. But he was suggesting that his leadership team met for 30 minutes every day in the evening, and they just talked about that day. And so every 24 hours they had a touch point, and he said that the speed with which they evolved as an organization was kind of cadenced by that meeting. I'm not suggesting that your teams need to meet every day. What I'm saying is that if you don't create that space will be absorbed by other things. So you have to explicitly carve out some space for these folks to talk about the challenges that they're running into. And I have found that it's important to endorse it, but not to participate. The conversation totally changes when I'm in the room. So I do my best to try to support the conversation, ensure that it's happening, but also to not be there, because there's a fear of change. There's a fear of failure that no matter how much you invest in celebrating it, having a VP, having a founder, having in the room just changes the conversation. And you could probably spend years trying to shift that mindset, or you could just not participate. And I think that not participating also demonstrates a level of trust that is really important for those folks to feel. So yeah, Number 3, make space for collaboration. Mislabeled slide, this one should be number 4. But then also, I think it's really important to create these predictable collision points. So I think a lot about what does the path look like from idea to execution. And it's, I think, through these predictable collision points of, okay, there's a spark. Where is this going to be? Where's the R&D for this idea, right? To me, that happens in the pod meetings. Then what's next? Well, we have a hypothesis, right? We need to make sure that this, if this thing is going to cost money, if it's going to change some operational process, then some level of buy-in needs to happen. So then there's an interface where those teams interface with our leadership team. Once that's signed off, then there's a whole buy-in and validation process that is documented and needs to be followed. And then once you're there, then you need to align and execute. So there are these predictable collision points, predictable behaviors that need to happen. And I think if you draw it out and you explicitly call these things out, you can have much more reliable execution of this. I just read the checklist manifesto, and it talks a lot about the importance of having not to-do lists, not task lists, but very high strategic level checklists. And if I kind of circle back to my aviation example at the beginning, one of the most vivid checklists that I remember from that book was there's I forget what the process was for, but if something goes wrong in an aircraft, there's like a 5 checklist. Checklist item number 1 is fly the airplane. So again, you understand the level of detail. These things aren't telling you like, hey, move this stick or push that button. You know how to do all these things. This is just 5 high-level things that you absolutely need to remember to do. And maybe that's one implementation of this. One is talk to your team, talk to leadership, get buy-in and validation, make sure you're aligned before you execute, things like that. And then the last one really is all around communication. I'm kind of doubling up on this, but I think that communication is so important because it is such an essential piece to keep everybody pointing in the right direction. If you've kind of been tracking and you buy into this idea, what you've just done is you've delegated a whole bunch of decision-making capabilities. So you're going to be making lots of micro decisions and micro experiments. They're going to be happening way, way, way faster than you're probably comfortable with. And that's okay. But to prevent that from turning into internal chaos, then you really need to invest in communication and alignment to make sure that all of those efforts are not only pointed in the same direction, because I think that's easy. Pointing them in the same direction just requires you saying, hey, here's the flag on the top of the hill. Everybody execute on that. It requires those teams to be talking to each other so that they're not tripping over each other as they come up with these great ideas and start executing on them. I believe, yeah, that's it. That's a little bit of what I've been doing recently and trying to implement with my teams. Hopefully this has been helpful. And I'm happy to hang out and answer questions or engage in discussion or whatever you folks would love to do at this time.
Yeah, well, Michael, thank you so much for that. That was great. And actually, tying into your last point, our number 1 question received the most votes in our Slido. I'd like to throw that out there. We probably only have time for one. We'll try to cover the rest in our podcast. But the one question that really got upvoted is, what did you mean? You made a statement of operationalizing communication. What do you mean by that? And it ties in, I think, so well with your last point. How do we take communication and really operationalize it?
I think I lost you just for a second, but I believe I'm back because I see you moving on camera again. Yeah. And I'll just take your question as, what did I mean by operationalizing communication? What I mean there is your communication process from when you reach the decision point of, I need to communicate this, to the end state of everybody is informed. Remove every decision point out of that you can. Just make it happen. And if that means I print out and laminate my 5-step communication plan and give it to everybody, maybe that's what I do. But it really is reduce all the variability, reduce all the unpredictability. If you want to invest in communication, I think part of that's technology, but part of that is just sitting down and saying, who needs to know what, in what cases, how can we keep this simple, and how can I let a team leader or a team member just understand really quickly how to disseminate this information. So whatever, I can't tell you how many Slack channels we have. It's probably too many, because what we struggle with is, how do we operationalize communication? What are the things that need to be persistent? What are the things that people absolutely need to see every time? And then what is kind of stream of consciousness information? How do we differentiate them? How do we ensure continuity of some information while ensure speed of other information? So it's a, like I said, it's a tough problem, but I think that if you take steps to operationalize it, if you take steps to put it in a process, and put some parameters around it, I think that that can be a big first step.
Awesome.
Cool. Thank you. Thank you so much. So can everybody see my screen? I just want to share really quick this really super exciting event. We've got the last in our series of 4 for the Open Leadership Series. So Neil's flagging, he's like a very famous management consultant and keynote speaker, and he'll be coming on Coaching Agile Journeys April 22nd at noon Eastern time. So please, if you haven't registered and this interests you, please go ahead and register on our Eventbrite. Promises to be a great session, and I think it might even sell out. So please join early. So excited to have this kind of audience for our Open Leadership Series coming up. And then I just want to share one other thing, in case you were not aware. We've got this super amazing podcast available on all the great podcast platforms. It's available on our website too, where you can go to any of these websites. So we'd love to hear your feedback. Tweet out at us, and we'll be answering questions from this meetup and other meetups that we didn't get to in the meetup on the podcast. That's the purpose of the podcast, part of it at least. So yeah, looking forward to having you join our next event, hopefully with Niels, and check out our other events. We've got some awesome speakers coming up, even like John Cutler and others in the community. So looking forward to seeing you at our next events. And
Thank you so much, Michael. We appreciate you taking this time to share with us. It's been great content. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Glad to do it. My handle is just @Cavopol on Twitter. If you folks want to reach out and give me feedback, talk about leadership, talk about SaaS, I'm happy to talk about any of it. So yeah, hopefully you see you around the Twitters and the LinkedIns.
Awesome. Have a lovely day, everybody. Thanks for joining.
Thanks, everybody. Bye, guys.
Bye.